Question brief, Deputy Tommy Broughan, you have 30 seconds.
Thanks, Cian. Well, the Minister, I think in January you supplied me with detailed figures in relation to the appeals process. I think you noted that it is a quasi-judicial process and due to increased staff, I think up to 41 people and to try and address, I think it was 38,000 appeals last year. But isn't it still a fact, Minister, that there's grave dissatisfaction with the appeals process? When I think I was your predecessor as a social welfare spokesperson, I did urge the system to be put on a statutory basis and given some independence.
Thank you.
That's still not the case. But the bottom line, Minister, is that we're still waiting 6 and 8 months, I think, on average, for appeals to be decided, either some early or after an oral hearing. And isn't that, although the improvements have been made since 2011, it's still not acceptable?
Thank you, Minister. Number 8.
Well, I want to thank you for acknowledging, Deputy, the improvements, because very significant improvements, and you've acknowledged it, have been achieved. But there is still more to be done. I agree with you on that. The workload of the Appeals Office has increased dramatically in recent years. This is the cause of the problem. The number of appeals received annually has increased from an average of 15,000 in 2000 up to 2009, whereas close to 32,800 appeals were received in 2013. That is down from 35,500 in 2012. The sheer volume of appeals, because of the sheer number of people looking to the social welfare system, some of it as a consequence of the economic collapse, just means that there are huge extra pressures on the system, which we've sought to change. Significant effort and resources have been devoted to reforming the appeals process to manage the increased workload, while at the same time recognising the need to ensure that quality and fairness are not compromised. An additional 15 appeals officers have been assigned to the office over the past 3 years. That brings the number up to 41. In addition, a new operating model has been introduced, and the measures that we've introduced have achieved significant improvements. The numbers of appeals cases processed in 2013, the numbers processed increased by 18% to over 38,400. I mean, that's the best outcome for many years since the crisis began. The number of cases on hand at the end of the year declined by 28% to close to 14,800. So we are actually dealing with the backlog, and at the same time, the average processing time reduced by 12%.
To interrupt the Minister there, the rest of the reply will appear in the official report. Deputy Broughan.
It remains, Minister, that we're talking about average times of more than 6 months for a summary decision and for 8-9 months for after an oral hearing, and I acknowledge that that used to be longer than a year. But just to take one of the headings on which you answered me in January, say domiciliary care allowance for 2012 and 2013, I noticed that just over half were granted on first application, and then when we went through this lengthy appeal process, the successful applicants rose to something like 70% of the total. And does that not show, Minister, a fundamental flaw then in the whole application process? The fact that such a significant number of the DCA applications were upheld on appeal. Our colleague Deputy Pat Nulty found the same thing in relation to carers allowance. It also rose to something approaching the 70% from, I think, around 50% at first instance. Does that not identify that there's a fundamental flaw, in the kind of information that people are asked for at the start, and that more support should be given to applicants, if you like, at first stage, in relation to documentation, in relation to what has to be provided. And I know you've our Northside Community Law Centre. We have for many years, I think, an anonymised case base of interesting cases and appeals. I know you've started something similar in the department. But isn't it time that that kind of information was, if you like, generally available? So I think, Minister, there's lack of transparency. You do need to look at this, and you should consider seriously putting it on a statutory basis. But I don't think our Fine Gael colleagues will let you.
Minister.
Well, first of all, Deputy, as you probably know yourself, in fact I think you made representations to me on the matter, successful representations, I have to congratulate you, to continue the department funding of the Northside Law Centre, and you know that I have been out there and have met with them on a number of occasions, because I do think the work they do in relation to social welfare and appeals and work like that is very important. However, just let me say in relation to the domiciliary care allowance, we've completely transformed the way that's done. And you'll recall that after I became Minister, I brought in all of the different parent organisations to discuss with them in detail issues that they had. I think the biggest area of issue were children on the autism spectrum. We, on the advice of parents, changed the forms. We also changed the timeframes over which applications and appeals were made. And I have to say, as a consequence, for new applications, the backlogs have been eliminated. The same is also true in relation to the carers allowance, because the working systems in Longford have been transformed. We also transferred at the time to new IT platforms. That did cause an additional delay, but the outcome has been well worthwhile.
Thank you, Minister.
In relation to the statutory basis, I'm not quite sure what would actually be achieved by it. I know it's been a point that's been made, but the appeal system was reformed in 1990 when the Social Welfare Appeals Office was established as a separate and independent executive with its own premises and staff, and appeals are now made directly to that office, where previously they were made to the Minister. The Chief Appeals Officer is legally obliged to submit an annual report, and appeals officers, as you said at the beginning, are quasi-judicial officers who are required under law to be free and unrestricted in discharging their functions.
Thank you, Minister.
But I do agree some applications could be much better prepared.
Of course, the point that people always fear is that the appeals process is used simply as a mechanism to deter people from making applications in the first place and to discourage them, and that it's in thrall, if you like, to wider economic policy, public policy, and in the case of this government, the fact that you have a particular policy, I think, in relation to expenditure on social welfare, which I believe your Fine Gael colleagues have insisted on, and in that regard, it's impossible to make a true reform here while this government exists.
Thank you. Final reply, Minister.
Well, the greatest reform in all of this, Deputy, will be as more people get back to work, and 61,000 extra people are at work at the end of 2013. That's the greatest boost, actually, to the economy. Also, the fact that we're expanding FIS, and spending 280 million on FIS. But one of the problems with applications in relation to very important and sensitive areas like domiciliary care allowance, you know this as well as I do, as other deputies do, that sometimes the individual application does not put the best case forward in relation to the individual child or in relation to the carer's application. Now, very often people often turn to a deputy or a public representative who can often give very good advice as to what may be required. So do the citizens' information centres, which the department funds at a cost of nearly 47 million between citizens' information and MABs right around the country. So I think it's very important that when people make an application for an important, and sensitive allowance relating to medical conditions, that they should be well advised before making their application.
Thank you, Minister.
In some cases, simple doctor's notes will not result in the application being granted.
Deputy Sean Kine.